Hey guys, it's Ice again. Very exciting review on the Tops Steel Eagle 111A Tanto. This is a knife that I got a few months ago, but in these past few months I've put about a year's worth of use on this thing. I've beat the crap out of it. I did some searching on YouTube, didn't find a whole lot of quality reviews on this knife, so to my knowledge this is going to be the first in-depth, completely thorough review of this knife and sheath. So let's get into it. I'll go over the stats and measurements first, and then I'll get into my observations on this knife. It is an 11-inch blade. Now the overall length is 16 inches. The thickness is precisely a 1/4 inch, 0.25 inches thick throughout the tang all the way up to the end of the blade face. So the weight of this knife is 33 ounces, which converts to 935 grams. The steel is 1095 high carbon with a Rockwell hardness rating of 58. It is not a stainless steel, so it does have a coating on it. It is a traction coating. The handles are black linen micarta. The sheath is combat ballistic nylon. The blade shape is obviously a Tanto point. This does also come in a hunter's point, which is sort of just a rounded, like a belly. This knife also comes in a 7-inch version of pretty much the same thing, the Tops Steel Eagle 107D. Now the 107D is basically just the same proportions and everything, it's just a 7-inch blade. It does have the Sawback. Pretty much the only difference is that the 107 comes with milled out a fuller in the blade flat that doesn't have any coating on it. Aesthetically, I like that fuller a lot. Functionally, you would have to oil it. Now these handle scales are held in by 3 hex bolts. They are removable, but they recommend not to remove them. The knife does have 3 holes for lashing, and underneath the handle scales are white liners. The blade also has a Sawback with alternating staggered teeth. I actually got this for $164 on Amazon, but it actually just jumped up to $180.49 with free shipping. Now, if you were to buy this from Tops, it would be quite a bit more expensive. $250, but if you order it from Tops, you can get customizations. You can get it serrated for an extra $15. You can get a camo finish on it for an extra $30. You can get Rocky Mountain style micarta handle scales for an extra $30. So if you got all those upgrades plus the $250, it would be $325. Rocky Mountain handle scales, for those who don't know, is basically a bunch of grooves of material cut out from the handle scales to give it a bit more grip. For an example of that, here's a G10 Rocky Mountain handle scale. Alright, now I'm going to get into my opinions on this knife. One big misconception about this knife is its size. It's sort of hard to tell in a lot of the videos, so I'm going to try to clear that up. I always go over the blade first, so I'm going to go over the size of the blade. Give you a lot of good comparisons with measurements and other knives. So here's a ruler. If you line up the 11-inch mark with the tip of the blade, then the end of the ruler comes out to where the grind stops. If you line up the end of the ruler to the end of the handle scales, the blade length actually comes out to 11.5 inches. So it is a very large blade. It's 11 to 11.5 inches depending on where you measure it. I'm going to give you some other knife comparisons. Here's a comparison with another blade that I've got that I reviewed. The 15-inch Victor Kukri by Kukri House Handicraft Industries. I'll give you a comparison with a little bit better known knives. Here's the SOG SEAL Team Elite. This is a 7-inch blade. Another 7-inch blade, K-Bar Marine Combat. And here's the Mora Classic 2. This is a 4.2-inch blade, 7-inch blade, 11-inch blade. So just to give you a perspective as to precisely how large this blade is, so you really know what to expect and you know what kind of role this blade is going to fill. Moving on, when you get a knife that's this thick, you sort of get under the impression that it's 100% indestructible, it's invincible, that this blade is never going to bend, it's never going to break, that you're solid, you're good, for life. That's not true. Even with a blade this beastly, I actually have discovered torques and powers strong enough in bushcraft to flex this blade. Not to bend it permanently, just a flex while batoning. Now I do have a picture of the log that did end up being able to torque this. Just to give you some perspective, it was basically like a tree like this big that I was batoning, and the entire tree was just binding into a massive knot. So if you can imagine, with all that force and all that torque just wrenching this blade out of its shape, it still retained and got through the log. So I've been incredibly impressed with the work that this knife can do in a survival situation, given the fact that this knife was also designed for tactical uses. So I'm very confident that it would not only do both of those, but it excels at both of those. Now, another thing that plays into that is the steel. Of course, you can't just get, a 1/4 inch thick of surgical steel and come up with the same results as a 1/4 inch thick of a super steel. So the steel that this uses is 1095. Like I've said in my other videos, 1095 is an extremely strong, durable, old tested steel. Some believe that with the right chemical additions and the right heat treatment, 1095 can actually perform on the level of a super steel. Now, being 1095, I have actually found absolutely zero issues with the edge retention. In my opinion, this steel has been performing pretty close to the level of a super steel. With the use that I've been putting against it, it's really incredible how sharp this blade still is, especially the point. I mean, I've accidentally dropped this knife on concrete onto the point. I mean, I've done some crazy stuff with this, and if you can still see that, that's an incredibly sharp tip. This knife is tough as nails, let me tell you. With the Tanto, I wanted the Tanto mainly because it's such a visually striking design. It's a very aggressive design, and it's just a sick looking blade. The Hunter's point wasn't nearly as attractive to me as the Tanto was. It really just caught my eye well. And I liked the fact that with the Tanto, you get this entire panel of just straight blade. There's no inward curve, there's no outward curve, it's just a straight blade. It's incredibly good for puncturing through things, it's incredibly good for batoning, and then it cuts upward at a very sharp angle, yet it still has a very tough and sharp point. Now I'm going to go over the grind. The grind is obviously a flat grind, which is very useful for bushcraft because a flat grind is very tough, it's very durable. It's perfect for batoning through large logs because as material moves up the blade, it splits at a very linear form of resistance, whereas with hollow grind, the blade is more likely to bind up in this area. So this is much better for batoning through things, and it's much better for maintaining its edge. This edge is a very obtuse angle, simply because the grind starts at more than halfway down the blade. So this is a very obtuse angle grind, and then the actual edge is ground even more obtuse than that. So my eye caught that this was at least a 25-degree angle. It's a very obtuse angle. 20 degrees is about the standard. That's what the K-bar has. So I'm not usually a fan of obtuse angles. I usually like my blades to be a bit sharper, but I have been very impressed with this. After all the insane use I've put it up against, the edge is still near perfect. There's almost no work that needs to be done on this. Now I'll go over the tip. This is a very interesting tip because the bottom of the blade comes very far up and cuts up at a very extreme angle, approaching something like a chisel shape. Usually those aren't the best puncturers for puncturing through materials and piercing materials, but this is very good for that, for one really big reason. The reason is that understated tactical swedge. If you'll notice there, that tactical swedge is tiny. It is very understated, especially considering the huge size of this blade. And what that does is it aligns the material with the rest of the spine as you're puncturing through something. So with a design like this, an understated tactical swedge really increases its puncturing abilities. On top of that, the understated tactical swedge increases the tip's durability and its strength because the face, this thickest part of the blade, is able to come farther up, closer to the tip. So it makes the tip stronger and it pierces much better. This is a beastly piercer. If I were ever to have to use this in a tactical situation, I would be very confident that, you know, whatever this needs to go through, it can go through it. Anything from like Kevlar vests. Knives actually get through Kevlar better than bullets do. Body armor, bone, if you had to, this can do it all. So another thing about this grind is that the grind stays the same distance from the edge all the way up until the swedge, which is really great because it doesn't decrease the angle up here. So the angle of the edge is exactly the same up here as it is down here in the belly of the blade, which is really excellent design. Maintains consistency whenever you're sharpening it back up, and maintains consistency of performance. Now I'll go over the Sawback. The Sawback, a lot of people think it's just decorative. They think it's just made to look cool, that it can't really get through anything. I'm here to say that's not true. This saw is incredibly effective. It's not quite as effective as a machete saw or a tree saw simply because it's thick, so you've got a lot of steel that you're trying to get through that branch. But this saw is very aggressive. It moves wood out of the way very well. While it's not the best for big branches because you don't have a lot of sawing area, it's good for small branches and especially notching. Now, something to compare it with would be the SOG SEAL Team Elite. The spine on this all the way up is rasped so that you can use it for notching to make a spear, to make a shelter, things like that. I found that this rasping is a little bit too unaggressive. This, however, makes up for that perfectly. The notching you can get done with this is very quick, it's very deep. This edge is perfect for notching and sawing small branches. Even making sawdust for a fire, this is great at all of that. Very useful tool. Another thing this is very good at is striking a fire. If you've got a fire steel, if you've got a ferro rod, using the sharp edge of one of these teeth to strike a fire is very effective, let me tell you. It strikes like nobody's business. That's a great addition because then you don't have to, you know, mangle up your very delicate, maintained knife edge trying to strike a fire. You can instead use the back of a sawtooth instead of mangling up your edge. So great addition there. Now another thing that they added onto this, you'll see, this part right here, this actually isn't a tooth. This last groove up here, this isn't a tooth. This is something that carried over from the Tops Tom Brown Tracker, very famous survival knife, very effective knife, very versatile. Now what this is for is basically if you ever need to like break through like a barbed wire fence or something like that, basically you can run the wire through that and then bend it out of proportion and break the wire. I've found it actually does work depending on the wire you're doing. For the thicker stuff it doesn't work too great, but it's a great addition to have in case you ever need to use that. And it's positioned far enough up onto the blade where you can get a lot of torque and force and leverage onto that. Now, an ulterior purpose or an ulterior motive of the Sawback, this is very important, is keeping the weight of the blade forward. Now you'll notice between all of these indentations in the body of the blade to make that saw, accumulated, that's removing a lot of steel. That's removing a decent amount of weight, you know, up to an ounce or more. And so what that does is when they stop it right here, they have this big body of blade right here to keep the weight forward, and you can get just so much momentum for slashing and just, you know, chopping with this knife. It's amazing what this thing can get through simply because of how much weight is up here, is up forward onto the top of the blade. So it's very excellent design, keeping the saw back on like near the handle, so the weight is forward, but you still get leverage for that wire, and the saw is closer to the hand, so when you're actually sawing through things, you have more control over it. excellent design by Tops. Another purpose of this part of the blade that is left unsawed is for batoning. So when you have a log, say the log is right here, when you're batoning through it, sometimes it sort of sucks to have a saw back because you baton onto it and your baton gets stuck or it gets mangled up by the saw. Or your teeth can get beaten down if you try to use a rock, albeit you should never use a rock to baton. That is not a proper bushcraft technique. But they stopped it. They left about 4 inches of solid blade with no saw, of just bare steel up here for you to just wail on when you're batoning. And let me tell you, it works really well. It really, really does. It's enough space that whatever baton you're using, you have plenty of space. You're not, being choked off the end or back onto the saw. And there's plenty of space back here for the log to move up. It's an excellent design. Now, something else about the saw is some people would have preferred that the saw would have worked a bit better if the teeth actually came out from the blade face. So instead of being cut out, they would like move out staggered, sort of like you see on a machete. There's a very specific reason they did not do that. The reason being is that when you're batoning, those teeth would get mangled up, or that would hold back, it would start to bind when the log tries to move up the blade. This way, you've got a saw still, but you can still baton with it very effectively, and those teeth aren't binding up onto the blade. Now, of course, the saw is only pull-back motion. It's not a double direction saw, but even still, you don't really need it to be multi-directional for it to be effective. Now I'm going to go over the traction coating on this blade. The traction coating is very thick. It's a bit less abrasive than I thought it would be looking at the detailed pictures online. I thought it would be quite a bit rougher and more abrasive than it was, but it's actually not too bad. It's really not. And it's a very thick coating, but it does wear down pretty well. I've found that things like even the thinner coatings like a stonewash or the titanium nitride, they actually do last a little bit longer. You can see after a few months of really hard use, right there, the coating has started to wear off around the edge of the face of the blade. Of course, that's always the first part of the blade that starts to lose its coating, is directly behind the edge and then on the edges of the face. That's where you're going to start seeing the most wear, and that's where you're going to start seeing exposed steel. To see something that has a bit more wear on it, it would be something like this. You can see with a hollow grind you don't really get very much wear right behind the edge. With a flat grind you get a lot more. Up on the edges of the face you've got quite a bit of exposed steel just after all those years of use. But nonetheless, it is an excellent coating. Since this is not a stainless steel, they did have to coat the entire blade before putting the handle scales on to prevent rust. So even the tang is coated. Even if you were to remove these handle scales, under the tang I believe would still be coated. Also where the coating wears off frequently is on the edge of the saw teeth. You're going to see that quite a bit. The only parts of this blade that are untreated are the edge, of course, and the back of the saw teeth. So you are going to have to treat those to prevent rust until the coating wears off the entire blade, then you're going to have to oil it. Another thing to mention is the lettering. The lettering is not permanent. You can already see the E on the end of the eagle, in the Steel Eagle 111A, the end of the E has started to wear off pretty badly. I bet in about a year this would be pretty close to unreadable. And the fact that this is directly behind the edge in a place that is quite prone to wear on the coating, and in a location on the blade that you're constantly using for batoning, I feel like that wasn't the best location for the lettering of Steel Eagle 111A. It's not a huge deal, you don't always need that lettering there, but it would be kind of nice to have it moved up a little bit out of the way, or even better, they could really step up their game here and have a very shallow engraving. That would promote the longevity and durability of the lettering. Also, the Tops logo with USA is it's in a much less prone to wear area I don't think this will ever go away just because it doesn't get wear right there. And likely the serial number S289 right there, both of those have the same lettering system as Steel Eagle 111A. No lettering on this side, however, on the back face. Alright, now one thing to mention is that when this traction coating wears off, it does get a lot smoother. So pretty much on your first 2 or 3 batons with this knife, this traction coating gets a lot smoother, so don't worry about too much resistance when you're sliding through the log. Just something to mention. Now I'll go over the handle. Some people love this handle, some people hate it for a number of reasons. The first one being its finger choil right here. This has a very exaggerated finger choil. Basically, index finger wraps around this part and the rest of your fingers just sort of fall into this ramp right here. Let me tell you, firsthand, it is a very comfortable grip. It's very solid in the hand, it's very effective. And I found that I actually like this finger choil a lot because when you're in the woods and you're not using this knife but it's still in your hand, it's much easier for the knife to just sort of dangle on your fingers with that very exaggerated finger choil. So I do like that a lot. It's very form-fitted to the hand. A big issue with that finger choil is when you try to do a back grip, it's really not very comfortable to use the knife like this. However, my argument against that is you're never going to use a knife of this size like this. It's just not going to happen. The only time you'd use that is when you're sawing, and then essentially you can just move your hand back onto this part of the blade. And it's actually very comfortable for sawing. It keeps your hand from jumping up onto the blade with 2 guards. I think is very effective. I have used this saw quite a bit. For some larger hands, this part might get in the way. You probably won't be able to fit your the ball of your palm onto this without bumping up onto this thing. So it's not ergonomically designed for sawing. It's ergonomically designed for carving, chopping, hacking, batoning, things of that nature, which are all done in front grip. So in my opinion, this is an excellent finger choil addition. Next is the thumb ramp. A lot of people sort of wish that with the top Steel Eagle 111A and 107D, the 7-inch version of this knife, they wish that they would have had a better finger guard, a resistance to your hands jumping up onto the blade when stabbing into materials. Here's a reason they didn't do that. The biggest reason is definitely the thumb ramp. With a bushcraft knife, it's very important to have a thumb ramp to increase your spine control over the blade, to have control on the spine, especially when you're choking up onto it. You can't choke up onto a blade when there's a finger guard. For example, something like this. You can't choke up on, that is the most uncomfortable position for a bushcraft knife. Again, why this is not a bushcraft knife. This is a combat knife. So you frequently see finger guards on a combat knife. Excellent combat knife, by the way, just don't use it for bushcraft. So the reason they didn't put finger guard on this is because while this is geared to combat, this is also very strongly geared towards bushcraft and survival. And putting a finger guard in here would dictate that it's used only for tactical combat uses. Whereas if you take that finger guard off, now you can use it for both. You can still use a knife for combat uses, even though it doesn't have a finger guard. For example, the SOG SEAL Team Elite. Now this does not have a guard up here. This is just a thumb ramp. Yet this is a combat blade. This is the standard issue of the U.S. Navy SEALs. Of course this is a combat blade, but it has a thumb ramp, so it can be dual purpose. It can be used for survival or for tactical and combat uses. Thumb ramp, in my opinion, is better than full-length finger guard when you're trying to dual purpose a knife towards bushcraft and combat. So excellent design here, excellent design here. While it is a good decision that they didn't have any handle guard right here, I would have preferred that they would have a little bit of a guard right here, maybe a bit as aggressive as this finger choil, because there's really nothing you gain by chopping this off. I mean, you can get over it just as easily, so it doesn't really add anything, in my opinion, to cut this part off short. So they totally could have added more security from your hand jumping up onto the blade. but it's not a huge issue. Now this jimping on the handle is very effective. There's only jimping on the back of the handle, there's no jimping up here, which I sort of like. I tend to have a much tougher palm than I do the insides of my fingers. So I sort of like there to be more aggressive jimping on the back than I do on the fingers. That's exactly what they've done here. They've got very aggressive, very excellent firm jimping right there. That's not going anywhere. And on the center of the palm. And they've actually choiled out the handle scales so that the jimping is exposed both here and on the thumb ramp jimping. Excellent attention to detail. If you wanted to choke up on this knife, you sort of can. With this right here, this isn't a very good secondary finger choil because it's not enough space for your finger without hitting the edge. Albeit this edge is relatively dull on this part of the knife, so you're not going to cut yourself there. So you can choke up on it if you want. Then again, now your thumb is hitting the saw teeth. Excellent jimping, but it'll also rip into your skin. So you can sort of hike up if you want to, but it's definitely best to keep it back here. With how heavy this blade is, you're not going to be using it for fine bushcraft anyway. Whereas for an example of a knife that you can choke up on, again, the SEAL team, you can use it in a back grip for combat purposes, bushcraft, like batoning purposes, or if you want to get some fine work done, they have this secondary finger choil. So you can hop over that guard, put your finger back there, use this secondary apex and the rasping as jimping. Works very well and you can get a lot of very fine work done. Now I'll go over the handle scales. The handle scales are what's called black linen micarta, and essentially, to my understanding, it's basically a linen resin hardened into a handle scale. And these handle scales actually are rounded off by hand. I've watched the process. So this is rounded off by hand. You can see it's not done by machine. Great personal touch in my opinion. I didn't have a lot of experience with micarta before I got this knife. The micarta handle scales aren't quite as grippy as I thought they would be, but they're definitely not as smooth as something like Zytel or, God forbid, polished leather. It is still quite grippy, and especially when it's wet. I've noticed this is a very reactive material. It starts out, it comes right out of the box, very light colored. I think I have a picture I might post. As you use it, as you grip it, the oils in your hand will actually darken the material. It'll turn it even up down to a black color. So you can very simply solve that by just running this under a bit of water, getting the entire thing wet, and then just wiping it off. In about a minute, the entire thing will go from black to very light colored green again. So it cleans out those pores very well, very quickly. And I've noticed that when this is wet, it's actually a bit grippier than when it's dry, which is incredible technology. One of the biggest issues with grippy materials is that when you're in harsh environments, rain, when you fall into a river, when it's very muddy or moist or humid, or very sweaty, the handle scales on many knives will often get very slick. It can slide out of your hand. It's a big issue that handle scales have to address. Linen micarta does it very well because when it gets wet, it actually sticks to your hand better, which is amazing. It turns that weakness into a strength. Excellent decision to use micarta as their handle scales. The handle scales on this actually aren't just smooth, a straight surface all the way through. They actually have very small valleys between these bolts. So right here and right here are two very small valleys, and that's where you're seeing all of those layers of the black linen micarta. The purpose of that not only is aesthetics, but also to give a little bit more ergonomics in the grip. So when your finger wraps around this, there's a lot of belly here. But when your middle finger wraps around here, it's falling into this valley right there. So it gives a little bit firmer of a grip. And then same with your ring finger and the rest. Now I'll go over the liners. Between the handle scales and the steel are white liners. What these liners do, to my understanding, is instead of having micarta on steel, it's micarta on the liner on the steel. So it's sort of protecting the black linen micarta, increasing its lifespan, And also, if there's any part of this tang underneath those handle scales that is not covered, then basically those liners are going to be protecting the uncovered steel of the tang from the water that might have gotten through the black linen micarta scales. So now, instead of that water going straight through into the tang and rusting it, now the tang is protected first by those liners and then the micarta over that. I've also heard, I'm not sure if this is true, that these are shock absorbers. It doesn't seem to be true simply because they're not placed to be shock absorbers. Mostly when you're chopping or when you're batoning through something, most of the shock is the tang bucking up against your hand. Sort of like the kickback on a rifle. You're feeling it on the handle, mainly from the tang. And so it doesn't really make sense that they would have shock absorbers on this beneath the handle scales, because that's not really touching your hand. That's not helping you in any way. If they were shock absorbers, they could definitely improve on that by somehow putting them, between your hand and the tang, maybe making a covered tang. However, then that introduces issues like jimping and whatnot. And also, a lot of people just like to have a nice exposed tang to really know that they're getting a durable knife. So in my opinion, I don't think these are shock absorbers. Even if they are, I'm glad they didn't cover the tang. I like an exposed tang. However, that being said, this tang is very well flush, very smooth with both the liners and the handle scales. If you close your eyes, you really can't even identify where the tang stops, the liner begins, and the handle scale begins. It's completely smooth, excellent craftsmanship there. Now, another thing to mention, I haven't seen the bare tang. I'm not sure. This might be like a solid piece of steel all the way around with just small holes for the screws, or there is a possibility that large sections are milled out to save weight. In either scenario, both are good. I'll explain why. If it's a solid piece of steel all the way down, that's best for structural durability because it's full tang all the way through. If it's not, basically what that does is it adds more weight up here. So it keeps the balancing, I'll show you the balancing point here. So that's about the balancing point right there. So what that does is it keeps the weight up here on the blade, so you get a lot more hacking and slashing momentum up here. Both are excellent design. Even if it does have milled out holes in the tang right here, I still don't think there's any issue with structural durability. I think this being a 1/4 inch thick, even if it was just a truss through here, it would be incredibly strong. It's like an I-beam. Now about those handle scales, I saw somewhere, I think it was on their website, said all caps, do not remove the handle scales. While it does have an option if you wanted to with those screws to take off those handle scales, it specifically says do not remove them. I don't know why that is, and frankly I don't need to know why. Whatever is under there, I know it's structurally durable through experience. I'll go over the holes they've got for lanyards and lashings and whatnot. They've only got 3 holes for that, which is sort of abnormal. Usually if you've got any holes up front, they're symmetrical, so they would have a hole there. I don't know exactly why they didn't have a hole right there. They totally could have just finished that off and made making a spear a little bit easier. I would have preferred that, but whatever. If you really need to, you can bore your own hole with a carbide tipped or diamond tipped drill bit. So not a huge issue there. Now I'll direct your attention to this one. This hole is actually larger than these two. These two lashing holes are the same size. This one is quite a bit larger. Now the reason for that is a lanyard. If you would have a lanyard on this knife, it would be right here. They wouldn't put it back here because when your handle slides off of the knife, your fingers are on this side. So when your handle slides off, you're going to be grabbing the lanyard right here if there's a lanyard right there. You're not going to be coming around and grabbing the lanyard off this back hole. So excellent attention to detail in my opinion. They've got a larger hole there so you can loop, You can get 2 or 3 layers of 550 paracord through that if you need to, maybe even 4. So finishing up here, I'll just give a user account about this knife. The role that I use this knife, the role that this knife is filled in my carry is sort of between a machete and a large batoner. This has an amazing amount of hacking power. You can get through branches that big around with just one strike. There's just so much force that you can get behind this edge with excellent edge retention. That being said, I sort of wanted this edge to be a little bit more acute. However, being that it is a flat grind and it's meant for hard use, I'm willing to have an edge that's this acute, about a 25-degree angle, because it's so durable, and you don't really need a razor sharp edge when you've got this much power behind the edge. Unlike the larger kukri, this knife isn't something that's going to be splitting wood by its own weight. It's not something that you can just drop down and it's going to split a log. This is more like the work of an axe. This is not. So they do fill very different roles. This is actually much faster of a swinging tool than a kukri is. So before I got this knife, my opinion was that the most useful tool in my arsenal was my machete. Not the kukri, my 18-inch Gerber Gator machete. And that's saying a lot. Out of all of the knives that I spent so much money on, the machete was my most useful. It's changed now that I have this knife. It's thick enough that it's not going to break or get a permanent bend, but it's thin enough that you can swing it very quickly and have a lot of weight up here forward to really get some momentum and hacking and slashing motion into this. In the Spec Ops category of knives, this is an excellent knife. Just what you're getting is amazing. When you compare to the prices of like Spartan blades, Treeman knives, you're paying $400 less than some of those knives for something like this. So this is excellent, excellent value, great knife. So now I'm going to go over the sheath. This sheath is a decent sheath. Let me just say that right off the bat. There are some issues. First off, it uses Velcro. I've said this a lot of times in my other reviews. I do not like Velcro. It is a very temporary attachment method. It wears down over time. So in 15 years of use, this Velcro is going to be completely incapable of holding the knife. It's just going to be weak, and in that time I'm just going to put my own snaps on it. If any knife maker is listening out there, stop it with the Velcro. Just put a snap on the sheath. Since there is no tension in this sheath, you'll notice that when you put the blade in, there's nothing holding it in. It'll just slide right out. So you do have a dependence on these Velcro straps. So what I do is, instead of unhooking both and hooking both every single time, I sort of stagger the use. So when I go on a trip, I'll put the knife in the pack with this strap Velcroed and this one flat underneath. I just Velcro it over itself and ignore it. So that splits up the use, so you don't have to worry about Velcro going bad too quickly. Now you'll notice this Velcro strap is wider than this Velcro strap, for the simple reason that this part of the handle is much longer and this strap has to get through that finger choil, which is much narrower. I mean, they're probably both going to wear down at the same rate. Anyways, I would have preferred that they would have, maybe one Velcro strap and one snap. Just make everyone happy. Have a snap and Velcro. Just don't limit everyone to Velcro. I really hate Velcro. This sheath does have a plastic insert. However, this is not nearly as tough of a plastic insert as, for example, the SEAL Team's sheath is. This sheath, this plastic insert, you can actually put a binder clip over this and squeeze the blade and it becomes a pressure sheath, so you don't need this strap. You can't do that with this simply because this isn't a solid piece. Basically, the plastic that's in there is a sheet of plastic that they looped over itself. So when you squeeze it, it basically cracks. So you can't use, you hear that snapping, that's it cracking. So you can't use a binder clip on this because those layers right there, that's too fragile, that's gonna break. So You can't even make this a tension sheath if you wanted. But you can't actually put the knife in either way. It has to be this way with the edge going to the left or your right. If you try to put it in the other way, it's not an ambidextrous sheath, it gets stuck. So it is fitted near the tip, so it has to be in that way. Another point against it, in my opinion. That being said, there is a lot of good versatility to the sheath and the draw of the sheath. The back of the sheath actually is MOLLE compatible, mostly. However, there are some spacing issues. Most MOLLE webbing is 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. This isn't. This is 1 inch, webbing, and then there's like 1.5 or something inches of space between those, which it's incorrectly spaced MOLLE webbing. They totally could have just kept the same number of straps here, put them closer together. Nonetheless, you can still, string this onto the outside of a backpack, a thigh rig, something like that. You can still use it. It still works pretty well. This is the spacing of regular MOLLE webbing to give you some perspective. This is not the correct spacing. I don't know what they were doing there. And this knife is geared to special forces. I don't know why they spaced it incorrectly. Luckily, they do have a snap here instead of frickin' Velcro. They sort of had an overly long strap coming off of the snap. To give you some perspective, this is the other MOLLE compatible sheath I have, and that doesn't even come off the end. Another thing to mention, this feels a lot heavier and more durable than this one does. Just in general, this sheath feels better put together and tougher than this does. That being said, both of these sheaths, even though this one is smaller, are about the same weight. So also, the strap right here is 2 layers thick of MOLLE webbing. This one is only 1. So it's not quite as rigid, it's not quite as firm and structurally sound. Points against it there, definitely. With this sheath, it's a very rigid sheath, even up here. There's a lot of structure in this, it's very solid, which I do like. However, there's a benefit in this because you can actually bend it all the way down. It's basically just cloth. You can put the MOLLE webbing through that and basically pin this down, make the sheath shorter. And what that does is if you put your belt through that, then when you have the knife on your belt like this, there is no handle pad to catch on. It's just right there, very quick draw. Excellent in my opinion, excellent design, because having a quick draw is extremely important on a tactical knife. Be careful if you do this because this is not secure. If it's on your belt, it has to be tipped down, and even if you have it on a backpack, like if you're running, it'll jump up on you. So be careful, it's a very slick sheath. These sheaths both have pouches. Believe it or not, this is a point for this sheath over this one. This has buckles here instead of Velcro. A lot of people ask, if it has a buckle, how are you going to adjust it? What they did to address that issue is they've got on the back strap of this buckle, essentially to adjust it, what you're going to do is you pull this up and you feed that through. So you can feed this over this way to extend it, and you can tighten it down this way to shorten it. That is an excellent design feature. Now, another feature of these buckles that is worth mentioning, they come with this elastic strap over this pouch. So basically what you put in there, especially the larger it is, if you put like a multi-tool, flashlight, sharpening stone, whatever you've got, when you put it in there, that strap is going to be holding it down tightly. So it's squeezing it down, so even if you didn't close it completely, it's still going to be in there. Honestly, these pouches on the front of the sheath are almost better than the sheath itself. Now this sheath does come with a whistle. So the whistle comes inside of the pouch. It's just a very slim, standard black whistle. On the front it says Tops Knives, Spec Ops, Trust Tops, and then the website and phone number along with their logo. It also comes with a lanyard hole if you want to put that around your neck or on a keychain or whatnot. It is a very loud whistle, and a lot of people think this is just a dinky addition, it's not really useful, but let me tell you, in a survival situation, if you're trying to yell for hours on end, you'll notice your voice gets pretty hoarse. So having a whistle with you really does help a lot with attracting search and rescue, other hikers. This knife comes with all the bells and whistles, literally. Now, this sheath does come with paracord eyelets. It actually comes with 6. A lot of people see these 4, will wear the other 2. They're actually under this strap right here. These eyelet holes, they only go through the top layer. They don't go through the back side of the belt loop. So this is the belt loop, and this is the MOLLE webbing. So it does come with a belt loop. And then they have 2 more paracord eyelet holes at the bottom if you want to loop it around your thigh or whatnot to keep it from swinging around. With this sheath, you can actually use the MOLLE webbing as the belt loop. With this, you can't. And here's the reason why. With this, it's very structurally sound even up here. So if you put the belt through there, it's going to hold. With this, it doesn't. Even if you've got it looped around the knife up here, if you pull on this, it just collapses. Even if the knife is up here, it just sort of buckles down like that. And it really doesn't hold it on your belt very tightly. Now I'll give you guys a close-up of the knife and sheath. So there's that super wicked tip right there. There's that understated tactical swedge, flat grind, sawback. That's where the coating has started to wear off. Steel Eagle 111A lettering. That's the Topps logo and serial number. And the black linen micarta handle scales. Difference between those 2 holes, the bottom one being much larger for paracord. And there are those liners / possible shock absorbers. Here's the uncovered side of the teeth in that Tanto point. And there's the back side, very similar to the front, just without lettering. And here is the sheath. It's the first pouch, second pouch with the lettering. And there's that plastic insert. There's those 2 straps. That's the belt loop, and then it has the MOLLE webbing on the back side. Those eyelet holes, there's a snap. If you're looking for an all-around, just indestructible knife that can, just do it all, it can outperform in tactical and survival situations. It can hack, slash, split wood, chop wood. It can pierce, it can puncture, it can saw. Honestly, this is the knife that you're looking for. This has got to be my most useful survival tool I have and my most useful tactical tool that I have. So not only does it do both, it does both to the best extent of any knife that I have for only $164 on Amazon with free shipping. So this has been the Topps Steel Eagle 111A Tanto, $164 off Amazon. This has been Ice. Thanks for listening, guys. Please comment, rate, and subscribe.